if you are just tuning in. I am Virginia Nelson, USA Today bestselling author, and I don't normally record from here. And we're not going to discuss how much work I put into just being able to record here. But the reason we're recording here is that shelf is a bunch of my books. So I thought I'd share some of them with you. So for instance, I did a YA under my pen name, Sleeping Garden. It was because my kids were super into Secret Garden. Yeah. So, but they were not, I'm sorry, let me reverse. I was super into Secret Garden. My kids were not into super into Secret Garden, and I wanted them to be. So I wrote a book that was a modern sort of retelling on that fairy tale. It's not the same story at all, but it was me trying to modernize the idea of what Secret Garden is, sort of the points and the themes. Anyway, this was a horror anthology that I edited this whole book in a month. I'm so proud of me. But anyway, this was Bloody Kisses, came out a few years ago. It had me, Serenity Wilde, Rebecca Royce, Melissa Breck, Ripley Proserpina. It was just a lot of fun. I have, where's my story in here? I don't even remember which story this was. Let's look. Night of the Living Dead. Night of the Living Dead. Look at that cool graphic she used. This book is no longer available. I love this first sentence. The rumors said the walls bled, which was enough to intrigue Madeline. She'd never seen anything like that. And if there was even a slight chance to see something like that, she was in. So, anyway, not available anymore, but just sharing it with you. Maybe I'll re-release that one individually someday. This was from an anthology, the Heroes and Heartbreakers anthology. I think Jody Linton was the spearhead at the head of that anthology. But this came out a few years ago. This book is now available standalone. It is short. I think it's less than 20,000 words or something like that. But it was about, born to money and rather blasé about it, Aloysius James McAllister Sutton is the third son of an oil baron. He turned to video games at a young age and eventually became a star, much to his family's dismay, mostly because of his hilarious internet videos. When a pal asks him to help out his girlfriend's little sister, his first response is not only no, but hell no. But they are a brotherhood, and their mentor told them that they must protect the innocent. When Drew Kramer's the only witness to a bungled burglary resulting in murder, the police point the finger at her as the guilty party. Not sure what to do, she runs to the one person she can trust, her sister. But her pregnant sister isn't much help. Instead, foisting off her protection on a man who takes absolutely nothing seriously. Can Jude find love while she's hiding with the heartbreaker? So yeah, that came out a few years ago in an anthology. We've got things like Odd Wolf, which was part of my Odd series. We have a lot of Odd books up here. This has got one in it. This has got one of the Odd stories in it. This was the Married Wait What anthology. Elite Elements. This one was so fun. This book is so dirty and adult. If you were into very dirty and adult books, I don't think this one's available anymore either. But Silicone is. My story out of this is. I do not think I have it on the shelf. Do I? Do I do it? I do. Oh, this is the story that was in this. And it's totally available on Amazon. Lady Dead may be number 5 on his hit list, but she trusts that Silicon will come for her. Save her or kill her. Either way, it'll be a hot ride. So yeah, that one's actually available. That was from the Elite Elements. So, yeah. Lots of history on this shelf. Horrific Billionaire. Odd Melody. I only have one of the Odd books. One of the actual original Odd books. These are like 150,000 words or something like that. These are really long. But these are my Odd series. They were my first series I ever wrote. I wrote the first book, interestingly enough, backwards. So, that was a thing. This is why most people know of me. The Penthouse Prince and the Irish Prince. There's also the Firstborn Prince, but... oh yeah, I do. I have them on the shelf. The Firstborn Prince. So that was my Prince trilogy with Entangled. Those are the books that are available like everywhere. They didn't like the 4th book, but I really wanted to tell the twin story. The names are very different. but it's about a twin billionaire. I don't know. Anyway, so that's an introduction to some of my work. You may have noticed there are both paranormal and contemporary titles that I listed. This is a contemporary, most important thing. It's a contemporary. The odds, of course, are all paranormal. The horror is... Oh, I have something exciting coming to my horror-loving friends. It is not a romance. More information soon. Intrigue. But this is Under a Wolf Moon. This is another one of my paranormals. I believe I edited... I don't think I edited all of Bloody Kisses. I think I only edited part of Bloody Kisses. I think I did like me, Sarah's, and Ripley's, and maybe Rebecca's. This one I edited all of them. Yeah. In like a month. They're really good. And mine in this one was Odd Wolf, which is available standalone. But this is not available anymore, but the standalones are. So anyway, oh. That's one of my audiobooks of Penthouse. So you can get it in digital or you can get it in CD. So now that we are 6 minutes in, yet again, I'm here to read to you. So let's read. All right. Our next excerpt is going to be from The Most Important Thing. Poppy didn't intend to go home ever again, but when she learns about her mother's breast cancer diagnosis, she changes her plans. Since she's back, her mother has a surprise up her sleeve. Let me see if I can bring you closer. Yeah, I can't. So, all right. It is what it is. And I drop you. Anyway. Since she's back, her mother has a surprise up her sleeve. If Poppy stays, she will inherit half of everything. If she leaves, she's out of the will, one worth millions. But staying means Poppy must face her twisted relationship with her mother. A story of love gone wrong, toxic parents, but most of all, hope. So when I wrote this book, I wanted to talk about the fact that a lot of us find ourselves, we had, toxic relations with our parents growing up. Not necessarily the most positive things happened. But now we are finding ourselves, a lot of Gen X and even millennials are now finding themselves the caretakers of that older generation. So I wanted to kind of tackle that. So there are a lot of different ways that people handle it in their own lives. I'm saying that weirdly, but I have a beautiful quote on the front from Sarah. It says, "A beautiful tale of love and redemption, but most of all hope." I wanted to talk about the fact that some people choose to walk away from toxic family members and just sever those ties entirely. Other people continue to have those toxic family members in their lives and doing damage. Other people find different variations of, healthy boundaries while keeping the connection alive. There are so many different ways to tackle it. For Poppy, when dealing with her mother, I kind of established it in the story. She was the scapegoat in a very toxic relationship with her mother. And so she left. She just left. And she went off and lived her own life. And now Mom's sick. Mom called her back home. And she could just stay gone. She doesn't have to stay. There's no rule saying she has to stay. Yes, the will is worth millions. And yes, that's nice and all that. But is the money worth the grief? And in Poppy's case, I'm not trying to give spoilers or anything like that, but she kind of makes the choice. She wants to continue to be able to look at herself in the mirror. And for her to be happy with herself, she makes very different choices than, say, her family made before her. We'll go with that. So anyway, let's read. I do not remember exactly where this story starts because I haven't started for a while, but it is very pretty. The formatting came out really nice on this one. Here's the blurb. Dedication for WSP2. Present. Poppy. Thomas Wolfe wrote, "You can't go home again." Poppy Hendricks believed him. She hadn't been back to her hometown in over 20 years, and she'd been barely over 20 when she left. Honestly, she'd never planned to return. but all of her careful avoidance of things that might remind her of where she'd come from was flushed down the proverbial toilet when one late-night phone call from her mother. I'm sorry. I'll try to read more clearly. Apologies. So, Mom had called to say that she was sick, although she hadn't elaborated on the subject, no matter how much Poppy pressed her for answers. Instead, she'd insisted that it was time for Poppy to come home, whatever that was supposed to mean. Poppy hadn't lived in North Carolina, not since the day of her stepfather's funeral, so she didn't consider it her home. Something about her mother's tone brooked no argument, though, so Poppy hopped in her 1961 cherry red Corvette and headed toward Topsail the next morning. She'd packed light. She didn't intend to stay. A 13-hour road trip, no biggie whatsoever. She'd just visit, ensure that her mother was recovering from the unnamed ailment, and be gone again in a week. Chances were good, some snide part of her couldn't help but think, that her mother had caused whatever was wrong. Botched plastic surgery, maybe? The thought was probably harsh, but she couldn't seem to drum up much guilt over it. Poppy and her mother parted on bad terms, hardly talking in the intervening years since her escape. She couldn't remember the exact reason behind the final argument preceding her exodus. Then again, she and her mom had fought so much. Who could differentiate one screaming match from another? Once Poppy established herself and created her own life, she'd sent cards to her mom on major holidays and called her here and there. Other than that, she felt no guilt or need for more contact. She'd read an article online once about cutting toxic people out of your life, including parents. It summed up her opinions on the matter quite well, actually, and her shrink approved the severed tie. That last year or so of living at home had been textbook definition of toxic. The poison hadn't fully flushed out of Poppy's system or memory, so their conversations currently remained strained at best. Then again, it wasn't like Jennifer tried very hard to improve their connection either. Hell, her mother still didn't approve of her choice of profession so far as Poppy knew. Playing with makeup, her mom usually interrupted any time Poppy tried to talk to her about her successful business in cosmetics and her corresponding brand collaborations. It isn't like you have a real job. Poppy didn't require anyone else's approval to find her joy. Her work was rewarding, and the pay allowed her to splurge when the mood struck, and her life was good as a whole. It wasn't perfect, but whose was? So, why was she thinking about all of it? The churning in her stomach got worse as she crossed the line into North Carolina, and she reminded herself that she didn't have to prove anything to her mother. She really didn't need her mother's permission to find joy. She'd gotten along fine without family for a very long time and would continue to do so. She should just enjoy the drive. Traffic hadn't been bad, and she made excellent time considering. The day was gorgeous, not too hot, not too cold, and she'd left the windows rolled down to enjoy the cooler breezes. The sun shined down from a flawless blue sky, glinting off the gleaming crimson of the car's hood. It wasn't often that she got to take Jarvis, her name for her pretty little vet, on a road trip like this. She'd bought Jarvis to treat herself a few years back. She called the car a reward, one she'd gifted herself for the anniversary of her financial success and the happiness created by her business. Her stepdad used to like classic cars, so maybe that was what drew her to it. She could admit as much to herself in retrospect. Whatever the reason, she hadn't been able to resist it when she'd spotted the old car needing a little love and rehab at a local dealership. Now it probably looked as good as the day it had come off the assembly line. Maybe better. And she'd had them put in a few modern upgrades. The drive was all open highways, a nice change of pace compared to Miami. It should have left her ready to face anything, recharged or something. Instead, she fought off waves of insistent nausea. The destination left a lot to be desired emotionally and sucked the joy out of the rest. Poppy hadn't been able to avoid the memories playing like some haunting infomercial inside her brain over the long miles. So, she hadn't stopped driving, well, other than pump gas and go to the bathroom. Old arguments, bitterness, all painful things, shards of glass that cut into her hard-won confidence. They were all better left forgotten or drowned in a bottle of wine late at night. Instead, she reviewed them while navigating the switchback curves in the light of day. Her knuckles were sore from clutching the wheel by the time she got close, and her eyes felt gritty from blinking back tears of frustration. When her stomach became a roiling pit of acid, she crossed into Pender County, North Carolina. She knew she was close to home. Topsail and Surf City were tourist hotspots, at least for the most part. Gunning it past the turn that would lead her to the house, Poppy instead headed first to a little strip of island lined with summer houses frequented by said tourists. She parked Jarvis, stretching out on her tiptoes as she got out, before striding over the boardwalk that traversed the dunes to the waterside. Once she hit the sand, she pulled off her shoes so they wouldn't fill up with grit. Walking felt good after the long miles in the car, but her stomach still rebelled and her nerves still jangled. Her back ached, low and burning, and she had to blink, even with sunglasses, because the reflection of the sun off the water and sand hurt her already irritated eyes. The beach was packed with pale bodies turning red in the blistering heat, and the children dancing in and out of the edge of the waves. Colorful umbrellas created tiny oases of shade over sand-splattered beach towels. For all intents and purposes, it looked like a postcard that should be emblazoned with a corny saying, something like, "Wish you were here." She wished she wasn't. The tide was low, so the smell of stranded shellfish battled the usual salty seaweed smell of the gently curling turquoise water. The scent struck her as familiar and strange at the same time. Light glinted off sea spray, and Poppy tried to find inner peace, or something like it, by squishing her toes in the gritty warmth and listening to the rhythmic waves. For a fleeting second, she saw something that might have been a flash of a dolphin's silvery side gleaming in the distance. She loved dolphins, always had. Although it would have been a bright spot for her, spotting one of the intelligent creatures this close to a noisy beach, she knew better. It was probably just the sight of a jet ski. Sunshine warmed her skin and wind kissed her flesh like a cool caress. The same breeze plucked at her hair, held back in a loose ponytail. It released strands to tickle her face, but even that didn't distract her from the oily feeling wrenching her gut. Peace, unfortunately, must have also been at low tide, as she couldn't capture even a little for herself. Giving up on her stalling, she searched her heart and the landscape for something familiar, or for those feelings she'd read about people having when they went back home. Where was the sense of belonging everyone blathered on about? Where was the satisfaction of returning to some place so full of memories? In her case, the memories might have been the whole problem. Sighing, she took one final look around for nostalgia's sake. Instead of feeling at home, she only saw things that should be familiar but weren't. The stilted houses with their pastel paint, bleached by the sun, and the waving palm tree bordered driveways. They seemed smaller than she remembered. The stretch of beach itself, hadn't it been wider? More vast? Once she'd given up on the beach and braved the drive back to the house, even the neighbor's home on their street seemed to have transformed into alien spaces, lacking anything tangible to connect her to the place or these people. As a kid, she thought North Carolina reigned flawless and bigger than life. In reality, the street was home to a line of McMansions, each one eerily similar to the last. Probably the same architect planned each and every last one of them based on the similarity. Nothing remarkable made their house stick out from the other bricked buildings on the street, all of which abutted a golf course and a country club. She even double-checked the house number just to be sure she'd picked the right one, but the sinking feeling in her gut should have been confirmation enough that she had made it home. Home. Ha! At the end of the driveway, she spotted a small, white-painted wooden cross jammed in their lawn. She couldn't quite read what the cross said due to the angle of the car, but she knew the significance of such crosses, especially when they were adorned with colorful and fresh blooms, now wilting in the sunshine. Someone had died there. In their front yard? Probably a car accident if Poppy were to guess, but still, in the yard? The gardeners had to be having a conniption. A small brown teddy bear reclined against the cross, surrounded by flowers, his black beady eyes shining. She wondered if someone left the bear for a dead child, which seemed like a horribly tragic thought. Of course, the other option was that a child left the toy for a lost parent. How awful would it be for that kid to lose their parent when they were still young enough to believe in the magic, loving ability of a stuffed bear? Of course, I lost my place again. It wasn't her problem, though. Nothing here connected to her in any meaningful way anymore. Grabbing her overnight bag, Poppy tossed it over her shoulder before before gazing up at the house through her mirrored sunglasses. How had she never noticed? How am I doing on time? Oh, we're good. How had she never noticed the front of the house resembled a startled face? The windows peeking out of the sloped roof, those were spider-like alien eyes. The door was a surprised O of a mouth. She shook her head, chalking up her wondering thoughts to exhaustion. She hadn't slept before getting on the road, not since her mother had called, and tiredness led to distractibility. Regardless of how lacking in uniqueness the place might be when lined up with their neighbors' identical brick structures, the Oyster Cove property was probably worth more than what her mom bought it for as a modest family home years ago. Poppy would guess its current monetary value to be around a few $1,000,000. Then again, she didn't sell real estate, so she could easily be off with that estimate. She remembered the layout of the interior easily, but she'd grown up there, so it made sense. The house held 8 bedrooms, as many baths, 2 kitchens, 2 dining rooms, formal and informal, of course. 3 kitchens if you counted the outdoor cooking space, and it also had a decent-sized library, a living room with cathedral ceilings, and was situated close to the ocean. Other amenities included 2 balconies off the back, an outdoor pool by the gardens, and a gorgeous indoor pool. Funny little details. The supposed value of a place. They still didn't matter to her since the place had become completely unrelated to her life. None of it made the situation more palatable. The cage might be gilded after all, but it didn't make it less of a cage. She didn't want to go inside, no matter how welcoming the front of the house looked aesthetically, no matter how much it was worth. She hugged herself tightly, arms wrapped around her middle as she stared up at the startled face of the building. "Hi, I'm home," she whispered to no one in particular. "Did you miss me?" The breeze was her only answer, twirling the loosened strands of her hair up and away from her face. It flapped her shirt against her back, which had gone sweaty with nerves, and goosebumps rose on her arms despite the heat of the day. A gardener chose that moment to come around the front of the house, pushing a wheelbarrow, and he glanced at her in curiosity. Blowing out of breath, she stomped up the steps, pleased when her shoes dragged sand onto the polished tan flooring. Without bothering to ensure that she got all the sand off, she strode through the door and entranceway into the white carpeted living room of her childhood. This too seemed strangely smaller than she remembered, as if her memory had blown everything into gargantuan proportions. White couches, those were new, but they fit the immaculate color scheme she knew her mother preferred. Throw pillows in carefully chosen accent colors, and a worn leather recliner offered the only warmth in the otherwise sterile space. That chair. His chair. She found herself drawn to the shabby old seat that didn't resist the compulsion to get closer. She remembered the recliner damn well. Tears threatened. Honestly, Poppy was surprised her mother still had it, as she complained about the thing so much when Judge was alive. "It doesn't match the decor," her mom had repeated countless times. "Just let me buy you a new chair." She'd said it so many times, in fact, that Poppy could practically hear the words in her head. He hadn't wanted a new one, he'd always answered her mom. He'd just gotten this one broken in. Yet here it sat, right where it had been when Poppy left home so very long ago. Judge wasn't alive to insist on it staying, yet his widow had kept it right in his favorite spot. After searching for something that felt like home, it seemed strange that the one thing that resonated with her was an ugly old chair. Another pang of sadness hit her from out of nowhere, and she stroked the soft, well-seasoned leather as she thought about the man who loved that particular spot. Judge Thornton, her stepfather, the only dad she ever really knew. Her biological father had died when she was too young to remember him, but Judge dropped into her life when she was, 15? Right when she'd needed a dad, not that she told him so. He was so tall, or at least he'd seemed that way when she was a kid. He had dark hair with a slight wave, and it looked just touched with silver when he married her mom. The silver had worked to overtake the black over the years that Poppy knew him, and she wondered if he would have gone fully white by now, if he'd lived. Blinking fast, she refused to think about that further. Why was she being such a sop? He wasn't perfect, far from it. His eyes had been a warm chocolate brown, sure, but his nose was too big for his silly face. Crow's feet surrounded his eyes, and more lines streaked across his forehead, wiggling when he moved his bushy eyebrows. She could remember the way his wrinkles would crease when he'd smiled, and of course the resounding sound of Judge's laughter was something a lot of people remembered. He didn't often get angry, but when he did, he got over it quickly. Unlike her mother. Judge Thornton had been well known and loved by the public for his comedy, and by the time they met him, not to mention for his acting and impersonations, a celebrity. To her, he'd just been Dad. This had been his chair, a place where he liked to sit and read his paper in the mornings and sip his after-dinner drink in the evenings. How many times had she come into this room just to lean against his leg and listen to her Walkman as he slowly paged through the paper? Maybe it was just the vividness of the memory, but she could almost smell him. Leather, musky soap, a little whiff of expensive scotch, and peppermint. She missed his funeral, as it took place later that very bad day, the same day she left this place behind for good, swearing to herself never to come back. For years, she'd struggled with waves of guilt over missing it. She should have been there to say goodbye. Then again, it wasn't like he'd ever know that she skipped it, which soothed her a little. Funerals were for the living, not the dead. That was what she reminded herself when guilt came to visit anyway. Even Judge's recliner seemed diminished by times, as if the duration she'd been gone away had sucked the very life and energy out of what used to be home. Nothing was as she remembered it, not exactly, and the sense of displacement had her already knotted stomach twisting even tighter in apprehension. If she was smart, she'd just turn around and get back in her car and ignore Jennifer Hendricks' request that she come back home. This wasn't Poppy's home. It hadn't been, not for a very long time. Her mother would be up the stairs probably, likely sitting at a desk in the master suite, as she did most weekdays when she was home, regardless of her state of health. Poppy should at least say hello to the woman before she left, since she'd driven all the way to North Carolina to see her. She'd say hello and then she'd go. Maybe she'd find a hotel and crash for a few hours before getting back on the road. She didn't want to sleep in this house, but rest would be good. Probably exhaustion was just the cause of the pressure behind her eyes, not repressed tears. She'd crash out, feel refreshed, take a shower, and get the hell back out of North Carolina before the sun set the next day. It was a solid plan. Poppy headed that direction, her legs rubbery and bile in her throat. The sense of dread or foreboding got worse with each step. Hand on the banister, Poppy stared up the stairs with trepidation and cold sweat slicking her back. This was the last place she'd stood for any length of time before her speedy exit, before she'd run away from all of it, and her gut said she was a fool to come back. Everything in her screamed for her to turn and run before they even realized she'd returned, before things could change again. The impulse had her spinning, fully intending to get out of her car and drive away from this place and all the secrets it held, but she didn't get far. She was stopped by large hands catching her shoulders and her nose slamming into a very familiar chest. She rubbed her nose because the impact had hurt, damn it. His hands on her shoulders sent little shocks of electricity dancing across her flesh, like her nerves woke up from just the pressure of his touch. She didn't have to look up to know who'd stopped her impetuous flight. He smelled the same, though she hated herself for remembering such a banal detail, and inhaling it brought it all back like a slap. Their connection had been instant and impossibly strong, attuning her to him as if some core part of herself recognized him. At the same time, the reminder irritated her, as it came with a lot of bitterness and old hurts. Probably that was what had my stomach in knots in the first place. My body rebelled at the idea of being in close proximity to him again. After a moment of feeling sorry for herself and controlling her response to his nearness so he hopefully wouldn't be able to tell, she did look up. At least he hadn't changed, even if everything else shrunk over time. He looked just how she remembered. Strong, tall, heart-stoppingly handsome. The flawless ideal of what a hero should look like if given actual flesh. She reminded herself that she hated him, just in case she was at risk of forgetting. Clinically, she tried to catalog his features as if he were a stranger. He was even more muscled than she remembered, thicker and stronger in appearance. I'm not going to go through the big long description. Let's skip to the good part, because we're at 27 minutes. All right, I'll just read it. Catalog his features. He was even more muscled than she remembered, thicker and stronger in appearance. Age had been kind to him, it seemed. His dark hair was a little longer, curling over his ears, and his high forehead in a careless way that other men would pay hundreds for at the salon. Since it was Vaughn, she knew just how his hair grew. A matter of genetics smiling down at him. He wasn't the type to worry over it was just the way his hair grew, not... Okay. He wasn't somebody who worried over much about appearances. Stubble darkened his strong jawline, and his warm chocolate brown eyes crinkled a little at the corners. If he smiled, they'd deepen those creases, those crinkles, so much like his father's. Her mouth went dry and she couldn't breathe, and a wave of dizziness washed over her so fast that she thought for a second she might pass out at the foot of the stairs, just crumple like some woozy damsel in distress from a gothic novel. Wouldn't he laugh his ass off if she did? The idea of him taking joy from her agony stiffened her spine, and she was finally able to suck in a cleansing breath. Her reaction wasn't about how he looked. No, what sent her system into an overstimulated riot was the unexpected waves of emotion-laden memories he evoked just by being himself. Of course he'd be the one thing she saw that wasn't diminished by time. If anything, he'd grown more powerfully masculine and handsome in the years since they'd last been together. Part of her wished his teeth would have all fallen out, or that he would have developed some bizarre and incurable flesh-eating bacteria which left holes in his flesh. Maybe he could have grown some horns. Hell, horns would have been a fitting, for the man was surely the devil himself, masquerading in the body of a mortal. She wasn't picky, just anything to remove some of the casual perfection would have been nice. Instead, it was as if time honed and carved all he was into something even more irresistible. The perfect drug for her to be addicted to, even after all this time. It was like all that he was and meant to her wouldn't fit into her memories, so she'd shrunken her recollection of him to save brain space, which just gave her another reason to hate him, really. It was such a long list already, though. She swallowed hard, having no idea what to say to him, or how to deal with the memories she was trying hard not to relive. Who was she kidding? She remembered. His lips, how they felt on hers, those hands, the ones resting on her shoulders, they could bring pleasure like she'd not experienced before or since him. Those eyes, now so distant, could become molten with emotion. And when he held her close, she actually did feel like she'd gone home. He was Vaughn Thornton, her stepfather's best friend, and part of the reason she'd left in the first place. She'd sworn never to see him again, yet there he was. "Welcome home," he said, and even his voice was too familiar. She clamped her teeth down, but her lips stretched into something like a smile. A polite one, because he was welcoming her after all, and had no idea the complete clusterfuck of a shitstorm that being near him caused in her brain. Her heart ached at the sound, and she hated herself for missing that voice. She should hate him. She did. Or she would in a minute when she got missing him out of her heart again. The smile twisted her lips up off almost automatically, a full-on smile, as if the expression had no connection to the tumult inside her. She opened her mouth to thank him, because maybe they could at least be polite strangers for the duration of her visit. She wasn't staying, after all. But before she could say a thing, he added, "So when are you leaving?" Okay, I read to you, and I don't feel good today. So, I'm going to part ways. I want to again congratulate Siobhan on her anniversary. Hopefully you guys enjoy these little videos. And if you'd like to find out more about me, you can check out my website, www.virg-nelson.com, Nelson.com. So, have a great day. This was from The Most Important Thing, and it is available like everywhere. Bye!